the liberty movement is becoming more and more persuasive to people out there. There are big names like Ron Paul and, of course, smaller names like Free Talk Live, where we're getting out there, getting the ideas of freedom into people's heads. And as a result of all this liberty motion, there are some people that are feeling kind of threatened by that. Now, we've pointed out before here on Free Talk Live, and by the way, the we includes me, Ian, tonight.
Alan.
And Daryl.
Multiple times we have pointed out how when you do activism, when you get the ideas of freedom out there in a way that is effective, in a way that brings people in a way that gets people interested, or at the very least gets them talking, you're going to see pushback. You're going to see people upset about that. You're going to see those people who are upset about that, you're going to see them do some nasty stuff. Some of them will lie. They'll make up things about you, or they'll make up things about the liberty movement. They'll make up, false ideas and start spreading those. They'll make up lies and misinformation about the people who are within the movement and start spreading those. We've seen that happen here in Keene. And I think that there are some people who believe that, oh, you guys in Keene, you're just doing it wrong. If you did it my way, if you did your action, your politics, or whatever it is that is the critique of the moment, the critique du jour, if you did it my way, then you guys wouldn't come up against the opposition. You'd have been freer in Keene now if you'd just done it my way. There's a lot of people,
don't you think there's
critics.
Opposition in every group?
That's my point, is that there are a lot of people who are critics of the way some of the activists do things, like up here in New Hampshire, specifically here in Keene. But I think most of those people have never been part of a movement that has been as effective as the activists in New Hampshire, and specifically in Keene. And so they don't know what it's like once their ideas start to actually penetrate into the populace, once their activism becomes visible. Because in a city like New York, for instance, or, Sacramento, large cities, you're not going to be as noticeable as you are if you're in a place like Keene, New Hampshire, with population 25,000. FreeKeene.com, the website that I created here, and Daryl, you're one of the bloggers for it.
Yes.
Free Keene is one of the more popular blogs in New Hampshire, let alone Keene. It's the only blog that I know of in Keene. Maybe there's something else out there, but I've looked, and there's not really much else in the way of blogs here. There's the newspaper website. There's the radio station website, but Free Keene's one of the only news sources in Keene.
So
there's Stop Free
SFK
Keene.
SFK isn't a news source?
I guess you're right. Stop Free Keene's a blog. Thanks for they're just
Or
so forgettable.
properly, Stop Free Keene!
With three
exclamations.
And you were actually muting yourself, and thank you for that.
And backed away from the microphone.
Yeah, I appreciate the mic technique there. But my point generally here is that when you start having an impact, people are going to get upset about it. And the liberty movement, while on a national scale it hasn't had an impact in any meaningful way, like liberty people haven't been elected. Okay, somebody's gonna argue Rand Paul. Well, he's not really a libertarian person. He won't even use the word libertarian to describe himself. So taking him off the table.
If he does use the word libertarian, it's always immediately followed by Republican. It's always libertarian Republican. It's never
ridiculous.
Libertarian standalone.
So taking him off the table, there's nobody else really worth talking about that's doing anything nationwide. And if there is, please bring that to the table and let us know. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. I did hear recently, just as an aside before we get to the story about from Salon.com, there was a guy who contacted me, actually Brett Hatley, formerly of the Bubba the Love Sponge show down in Florida. He contacted me to let me know that there's something exciting happening in Florida. Apparently, the person running for Senate or House, one or the other, U.S. Senate or House in Florida, one of those people in Florida is a Libertarian candidate who apparently is in a two-person race in the general election.
Yeah, it's one of the House races.
Yeah, so he's up against, I think, a Democrat or a Republican, one or the other. He's up against one of the other two parties, and people are all excited thinking that this guy's going to have a chance and that he's going to get in, like he's in a Republican district, and the Republican's not running, and he's up against a Democrat, and so they think he's going to run, or, I'm sorry, it might be the reverse. But either way, he's in a two-person race. And I was in a situation like that in Florida as well, and it didn't work out. The Libertarian only got like 30% in a two-person race. So I wish him the best. I really hope it's going to work out. But there's just not much you can point to as far as libertarians being successful politically. However,
well, there was one county in Florida where enough libertarians got elected to the Soil and Water Board that they were able to abolish the board that they had all gotten elected to.
that's news. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, that happened probably 8-9 months ago.
Wow. Okay. I would have loved to have known more about that. That's fascinating. I'm sure the Florida government is shaking in their shoes as a result of that. And that's just it. In most places, the libertarians are just a sideshow. They're, they're out there just trying their darndest to get on the ballot. And then once they expend all their
get on the ballot in Florida.
Yeah, well, once they expend all their resources on that, it's kind of hard to run a campaign up against big money Republicans and Democrats. So it's hard for the libertarians to make an impact politically. But at the very least, you could make the argument that libertarians, mostly due to Ron Paul, have kind of made an impact on the national scene. I mean, Ron Paul was someone who could not be ignored in the 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns.
Right, and now more people are starting to question, well, if that's what they deem as libertarian, then maybe there's a little bit of that in me. And
it's true.
Like a lot of people seem to have something that they feel particularly, driven to the same viewpoint as libertarians on. It's just one specific thing and it's not as general. But I feel like because of Ron Paul, now a lot of people are more comfortable to say that. It's kind of like going to the family reunion and saying, like, oh, I'm an atheist. Like, all your relatives are going to be
tough.
really concerned at that point and start giving you pieces of advice. If you say, oh, I'm a libertarian at the dinner table, then you get those awkward glances.
But it'll go better now than because of Ron Paul. Like,
Exactly.
You're more likely, if you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table with the whole family, you're more likely to have, if it's a fairly large table with, let's say, 25 people at it, you're more likely somebody else sitting there will know who Ron Paul is and have a good feeling about Ron Paul. So I think that's something that's changed over the last decade. Having been involved with libertarian politics for many years, I started in the year 2000. So I've been at this for a decade and a half at this point. And I remember doing outreach back in the year 2000, going to the county fair, the gun shows, the Gay and Lesbian Pride Fest, and doing outreach to people. People didn't know what a libertarian was. They had, most of them, the super majority of them, never heard of the word libertarian, just the word, never heard of it. And then of those who had known what libertarian, of those who had heard of libertarian, the word, almost none of them knew what it meant. None of them, because I'd always ask, oh, you've heard this? Well, how would you describe it? And the usual answer was, nobody had any clue. And I think that's changed. I think more people are aware generally of what libertarianism is, and I think Ron Paul's a big factor there. And so you're seeing kind of that pushback I was talking about. When you start having an impact, you start getting pushback. And Salon.com is pushing back. And outside of New Hampshire, the pushback's all intellectual. In New Hampshire, people get arrested and things like that for doing activism, and we're being targeted, and there's a lot more like real life pushback. We've had the house has been egged, things like that. But online, it's all discussions and intellectual stuff. So here's a story from Salon.com, who has been making a real point. Actually, originally appearing on alternate.org. But anyway, Salon has been highlighting anti-libertarian articles for the last couple years. They must be feeling like libertarians are making an impact. They must be feeling like the ideas are on the rise because they feel like they have to target them. Because if you're not impactful, if your ideas aren't a challenge to the status quo, then nobody really has any reason to refute you. They don't have any reason to spend time on you. But if Salon is spending time debunking libertarian or attempting to debunk libertarian arguments or make us look crazy or stupid, then that means that the libertarians are doing something, that there's some level of threat out there, and I think that's important. This is the 7 strangest libertarian ideas, according to Richard Esco from Alternate. Number 1 on the list: parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death. And we'll get into the details on it here in moments. And we'll see how many of the crew in the studio here tonight agrees that parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death. We'll dig into that here. 855 450 free. And how do you feel? You're welcome to share that with us here on Free Talk Live. 855 450 3733 is the Pro XPN toll-free line. This is Free Talk Live. What's the craziest thing you've heard a libertarian say? I mean, there's no doubt some libertarians have said some crazy stuff over time. So I can't blame certain Salon/alternate writers for either hearing things that actually were said that were crazy by someone who's a libertarian, or misinterpreting things that were said that weren't so crazy but sounded like they might be crazy because they weren't said very effectively. That's all a possibility. We're going to get into the 7 strangest libertarian ideas, at least according to alternate.org's Richard Esco, here in moments. The story from salon.com. I want to read you their intro here first before we get into number 1 on the alleged 7 strangest libertarian ideas. Number 1 being parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death. But first, the intro from alternate.org. Few movements in the United States today harbor stranger political ideas than the self-proclaimed libertarians. The Rand Paul school of libertarianism is at least as far outside the mainstream on the right as, say, a rather doctrinaire old-school form of Marxism-Leninism is on the left. And again, they're wrong right out the gate by using the term libertarian interchangeably with Rand Paul, or to suggest that there's a Rand Paul school of libertarianism as though he's got his own brand of libertarianism.
Right, well, and you were just saying he turned against that name, didn't he?
He will not accept the term libertarian for himself.
Right. He won't accept the term for himself. Other people try to give the term to him and then say that everything he does somehow fits within libertarianism. So I would say that there might be a school of Rand Paul libertarianism, but Rand Paul ain't the headmaster of it.
Yeah, exactly. And this just shows how twisted the ideas of liberty can be. You get somebody out there like Rand Paul, a few people in the media call him a libertarian, all of a sudden everybody in the media is calling him a libertarian.
And then they also make the false assumption that libertarianism is somehow to the right, when libertarian... And I had a program director a couple days ago that I was explaining the ideas about this show to.
Because you call radio stations to pitch Free Talk Live, and thank you for that.
And mentioned libertarian, and he didn't really understand. And I said, well, we disagree with liberals as much as we agree with conservatives, and we disagree with conservatives as much as we agree with liberals. And he still kind of didn't understand it.
That doesn't really explain anything.
It doesn't, but he was up.
It's showing equality, though.
Right, but he was just concerned that
you'd be one side or the other.
The owner of the station might hear us praising Obama, and I was like, no,
definitely not.
We don't agree with Obama on very much at all. We also don't really agree with the Republicans on a lot either, because libertarian, it's what they call fiscally conservative, socially liberal.
Yeah, that's a decent way of describing. Very short and fairly accurate way of describing libertarians. So back to the story here. The difference, he says, this is alternate.org. The difference is this. The mainstream media isn't telling us that we're in the middle of a Marxist-Leninist moment. Leninist politicians aren't being touted as serious presidential contenders, and all the media chatter we're hearing about a libertarian moment ignores the very harsh, extreme, and sometimes downright ugly ideas that are being disseminated under that banner. It's great to have allies like Rand Paul working alongside other Americans to defend our right to privacy, restrain the NSA, and reduce the military-industrial complex grip on foreign policy. It's possible to admire their political courage in these areas while at the same time recognizing that we may not care for the environment they inhabit. There's another reason to challenge libertarians on the extreme nature of their ideology. A number of them seem determined to drive competing ideas out of the free market of ideas, which isn't very libertarian of them. There has been a concerted effort to marginalize mainstream values, whatever that means, and ideas about everything from workers' rights to the role of government in national life. So by all means, let's have an open debate. Let's make sure that all ideas, no matter how unusual they may seem, are welcome for debate and consideration, but let's not allow any political movement to become a Trojan horse, one which is allowed to have a moment without ever telling us what it really represents. Obviously, not every self-proclaimed libertarian believes these ideas, but libertarianism is a space which nurtures them. Can the Republican Party really succeed by embracing this space? Why does the mainstream media treat libertarian ideas as somehow more legitimate than, say, the social welfare principles which guide Great Britain or Sweden? Here are 7 of modern libertarianism's strangest and most extreme notions.
So before we jump into this,
yes.
I know you have a question. Did you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just thinking. They're asking like, how are they viewing these libertarian points as more legitimate than, policies that people practice overseas? But if you look, Europe is not doing that great, and neither is Russia or Africa or any other country over there really besides China and maybe Japan. But the thing is, free market principles work better, and that's what libertarianism advocates. So I'm just saying this is
it's also bunk to claim that people aren't on television advocating for nationalized health care. I mean, that's ridiculous. There's all kinds of people purporting that.
I'm curious how the author of this article is somehow under the delusion that mainstream media is somehow touting libertarian ideals.
Well, there have been some articles. I think there was a New York Times piece, right, which actually featured the Free State Project and the Porcupine Freedom Festival. There was some sort of New York Times article about the libertarian moment.
Well, they're
so I think that's
labeling
what
everything
but they weren't touting our ideas. They were saying, here's some people that believe this.
They're trying to mislabel it.
Well, they don't like that. They don't like any of that. I mean, these people don't. The guy writing this article would prefer to not have any of those things happen. And there has been extra attention given in the mainstream media to libertarianism within the last half a decade.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.